Today we're back talking about the final season of Stranger Things. Yes, I realize I'm extremely far behind, but damn it, I said I'd work my way through all the episodes, and so that's what I'm going to do. Today we're going to be talking about episode 4, Sorcerer, which I think is probably the best episode of the first volume, and probably the second volume too. I've only just watched the finale recently, and so I probably need the recency bias to wear off before I can make any decisions in that regard. Before we go any further, I will say that we're dealing with full spoilers for the season. The reality is the show's over now, and I'm not going to be able to disconnect my brain from that and pretend like it hasn't finished, and that I don't know what's coming. So I guess just be forewarned, there's going to be spoilers, and in all honesty, my opinions on things might have shifted somewhat now because I've seen how it all wraps up. For now though, there's nothing else to say, and so let's dive into the episode. The episode picks up back at the farm in which they've kidnapped Derek and his family, but since Derek's an absolute unit, despite eating most of the drugged pie, he's been able to somehow wake up completely and has regained his bearings. This kid is truly spectacular in the role, and is a joy in pretty much all of his scenes, and this one's no exception. I love the way that he goes from all angry and defiant to this scared little boy, only for the reveal to be that he's trying to get them to let their guard down. Just great acting from this kid. Joyce tries to get him to understand that they kidnapped him for his own good, but obviously, he only pretends to believe her and tries to make a break for it and ends up getting tackled and pinned down by Will. I gotta say that it was a lot of fun to see Will doing some action sequences, and even though this one isn't much, it's far more than he usually gets. He shouts at the others to close the door, but ends up copping some dirt in the face from Derek, who climbs a ladder before pushing it back down, ensuring they can't get to him. You gotta respect the bravery from this kid, right? He's pretty resourceful too, now that I'm thinking about it. The Demogorgon arrives on the scene and starts to smash down the barn door, prompting Joyce to jump in with an axe to protect them all. I will say that in hindsight, looking back after the finale, I'm rather glad they gave her this moment. The reality is that when the show first started, Joyce very much felt like one of the big four characters alongside Mike, Hopper, and Elle. However, over the years that they've fleshed out the different characters and introduced new ones, it does feel as if her importance overall has been slowly eroded away, and she felt like she's just there during the big moments. This felt especially true during the second volume, and even at times during the finale, except for her attack on Vecna. Thus, her getting to stand up to a Demogorgon and try to fight one to defend her son and the others is just what the Doctor ordered. We also get the early hints that Will has some significant power over the hive mind, as Joyce is able to keep swinging at the demo and keep pushing it back, and yet it never tries to fight her. Meanwhile, after a couple of swings, both Karen and Ted Wheeler got swatted like flies. Giving Joyce this type of moment really did feel like it was a necessary step in not making her feel completely overlooked. I also like that she wasn't the one who chased it off in the end. Will was making it hesitate, but he wasn't in full control. It only retreats after it gets rammed by Steve in the car. This then leads into yet another excellent moment where Steve actually has a proper idea, to follow the Demogorgon into the Upside Down to try to follow it all the way to Holly. Hell, it's not even really that bad of a plan, as all they have to do is mark where it goes and then make contact with Hopper and Elle. It's not like they have to be the ones to fight Vecna, although they did battle him previously and came out somewhat victorious. However, that being said, at the same time, there was a lot more that went into that battle, and in this context, they would have simply zero chance to defeat him. He'd instantly snap their necks one by one, and it would be game over. I really loved the performance for Dustin here. It was just perfect. You knew that it wasn't going to end with them dying, and so infusing that humor into it here was just the right choice overall. At the same time, as all of this is going on, we get a look at Vecna's lair, but only the inside, so that can preserve the reveal that the Upside Down is merely a gateway, and his main base of operations is still within the Abyss, whose entrance is in the sky of the Upside Down. We then get the intro theme, and when we return, is to see one of Holly's classmates watching The Sword in the Stone on TV, when the military turns up and takes her into custody alongside a bunch of other kids who are members of her class. For once, these military dudes, who are kind of useless given the party's given them a runaround for so much of the time already in such a small area, are doing something right. They see the pattern. Holly was kidnapped the night before, and now 3 other kids have been taken this very same night. So they realize they need to act and thus round up all the other kids in the class, and in fact, I think it's just within a huge age bracket. A rare win for the military, but of course, I'm pretty sure they think it's Al doing this, right? They don't really understand that Henry's the true big threat, and they think Eleven's the mastermind. Either that or they just don't care. It's starting to look like they really jumped the gun killing Brenner outright. They should have taken him in to get their hands on all of his secrets. We then briefly cut back to the Upside Down car crew for our latest hint the Demogorgons are not coming from the Upside Down at all, and are instead coming from the Abyss. I really like that you can see that they've left clues about this early on. They have this part, the random wall, the fact that Vecna and his goons are nowhere to be seen, and the discussion of the wormhole in the previous episode that set the scene. However, I do wonder whether people were actually able to figure any of this out, because I certainly wasn't. So this scene does this whilst also continuing to build up the tension between Steve and Dustin, which I will stand by that they go way too hard on for my tastes. It does derail a bunch of scenes that they're in together, and after a while, it's no longer dramatic or tense, it's just tedious, like you can't wait for them to move on to something else. Eventually, this leads to them crashing the car at high speeds into the fleshy wall, and to be honest, I did think this was a little silly. They probably should have been way more badly injured by all of this. I get the wall sort of sucks them in and acts like a cushion, but it's still a bit ridiculous, you know? I suppose they really wanted to get rid of the car in the Upside Down, and this was the best way to do it. We then cut over to Joyce, who's calling Jonathan on the walkie-talkie trying to get a response. I tell you what, the story needed this. A scene where Joyce is actually worrying about her older son, although it's not like it lasts long either. I feel like season 1 was really the only season where their dynamic felt important important and fleshed out, and for the majority of the time, it seems that Will is the only thing on her mind, which is honestly very sad. I don't think this season ever adequately addresses the deficit, and honestly, Jonathan just feels so massively disconnected from so many of the storylines and got shuffled off to the side so much. It's so sad because he felt like such a key player once upon a time, and you can see where the writing struggles to make everybody feel important to the story and to the other characters. Hell, it's not even about overall storylines or anything like that. It's more that he doesn't get a lot of truly meaningful character moments or interactions with the others. I really think his character's arc would have benefited from a side story / wacky character team up with one of the youngsters. I think the character is a lot of fun, they just didn't do much with him when there was so much potential. Joyce then heads into the barn to see what Will's been doing. From memory, he's painted the door of the barn with the appearance of Vecna's lair, and reveals that Holly is in there, strapped in like Will had been during season 1, whilst there were also 3 more kids. This scene is largely filled up to the brim with exposition. It explains that Vecna has the kids and shows what's happening to them in the dream realm. It explains that Vecna doesn't want Will to be connecting to the hive mind and is trying to prevent him seeing things, but since Will was so close to the Demogorgon, he couldn't actually shut him out. We also learn they're going to have to try to protect even more kids by kidnapping them and getting them out of Hawkins to ensure that Vecna can no longer target them because it's out of the reach of the hive mind there. I will say that when you look at the entire season, they have a lot of these scenes where one character gives a speech to the rest of the group to explain what's going on and what they have to do. It was a big complaint for a lot of people, but for me, I really don't mind them because they kept them feeling interesting. They have a lot of quips and one-liners and jokes, which I think helps you keep caring about them. That being said, they can get a bit tedious. However, this one in particular was elevated due to the back and forth between Derek and Erica. It was funny to see Derek, who all the time we've known him has been a massive force of nature and a bully, get utterly slapped down by somebody. Erica's power of snark and shit-talking knows no bounds. I think the part of the scene I did find goofy though is that Will's just talking about what they have to do, and all the way from the entrance to the barn, which is a fair distance away, we have Mike shout out, "That's not all!" as if he'd been listening to the whole monologue as he was riding in, which is obviously ridiculous. He couldn't have been. It's not like he and Lucas were standing there waiting for a chance to add their input because they are completely out of breath. It was just a bit goofy is all. Anyway, they tell the group the kids are being picked up by the military, which means the military's on to them. And honestly, on first watch, this got me intrigued. I thought we might have them doing something useful for a change and there'd be a reveal they know about Vecna and the risk he poses. Not so much though, as we then move over to a scene which is there to explain what is going on and that the military continue to be idiots because they believe it's 11 doing all of this and taking the kids for a purpose they don't understand. See, this is why they probably should have arrested Brenner rather than killed him, because then they know the threat the one poses to the world, rather than thinking Al is the root of all evil like absolute fools. At the same time though, I did like that this scene showed that not everybody in that group is an outright bad person. We have a wide range of types here. There's monsters like Dr. K who are just like Brenner, misguided people thinking they're the hero like Sullivan, delusional men like that guy that Alan Hop captured who was lamenting the death of his murderer friends at the hands of Al during season 4, and now this guy who thinks that using kids as bait to draw in 11 is a truly horrible act. In the end, what he thinks doesn't really matter, as he's not in charge, but I think it adds a bit of nuance to the story as well to show that maybe not everybody in the military is a horrible person. From here we move over to a scene with Max and Holly, showcasing what happened after Max caught up to her at the end of the previous episode. This is probably one of my favourite dynamics in the season. The bond that forms between Holly and Max is so cute and really well acted overall. Seriously, I think Stranger Things as a whole has pretty great acting across the board. I've never felt that anybody has been noticeably bad in that regard, unlike in other contexts where a child actor might grow up and once they lose that cute charm, suddenly their acting no longer feels like it's up to snuff. Holly and Max though are often on a different level for me and are some of my standouts of the season. It was so cute to see Max trying to get her to trust her, using funny tidbits such as how Mike wanted to get an orange mohawk for when he started high school, only to be rescued from that fate by Nancy. I wish we could have seen this scene to tell you the truth, it would have been an all-time great. Max takes her to the cave with Holly pestering her along the way about Henry and how they need to find him to help him against the monsters, which of course leads to Max revealing that she wrote the note and Henry's the real monster. I love the music that kicks in when Holly enters the cave system following after Max. It felt very ethereal and very old school 80s fantasy in the best of ways. I honestly don't know if anything in the Never-Ending Story soundtrack sounds like this. I don't remember it well enough, but it 100% made me think of that when I heard it nonetheless. Max shows Holly her little base and then takes her to another side of the cave which overlooks a really stunning view. However, like she said, the beauty of this place is skin deep, as in the end, it's a prison of memories built by Henry to keep them contained. However, just as it feels like we're getting somewhere, the scene cuts away to the kids heading into the military base and showing us ahead of time which kids are actually going to be relevant to the story. We then come to yet another expositional planning scene where the Hawkins crew try to figure out how they're going to break into the military base, and they decide the best way to do so is using the tunnels which very conveniently go underneath the very place the kids are going to be hidden. I have to say, it does feel a little bit ridiculous that the military has no idea these tunnels actually exist. I mean, we saw that a lot of military personnel worked at the base even during season 2, and they had to pack a lot of things up. The tunnels led directly to the lab, didn't they? It's just a bit absurd. Also, now that I finished the show, it's becoming way more obvious they went really hard on these expositional scenes. That being said, this was another one that was largely covered up by the goofy dialogue, namely with the whole dick tunnel gag. They decided their best chance is to send Derek into the base in order to be able to make contact with them and tell them where they have to go and what they have to do to try to rescue the kids and stop them being snatched by Vecna. Also, did they leave Derek's family tied up in the barn or something? What happened with that? Do they just stay there the entire time until Vecna's defeated? Did they take them back to their house and dump them there? Did they at least untie them so they don't die of dehydration? It's quite literally never addressed again, which I found pretty funny, but it also seems to be a bit strange even if they just could have had a throwaway line for it. From here, we return to the Upside Down in order to catch up with Hopper and Eleven, but not before we see that the guy they took hostage gets himself free and goes off in search of them to try to warn his allies. I have to say, this dude is a big example of perfect casting and perfect acting for the role. He has this look and aura that makes him seem so horrible and hateable, and you just want something to happen to him, you know? You want to see Eleven kill this guy, which eventually we know she does, and it's awesome, but a big part of why it feels awesome is that sense of catharsis you get from it. This all stems from the great job the dude does as an actor, but also that the story does of making you hate him, and in that way he's such a great antagonist. Hell, I actually think he's a better written antagonist than Dr. K now that all's said and done. However, that's just a tiny portion of the scene, and the rest is dedicated to Hopper and Al. Here we start off with more Hopper not wanting Al to put herself in danger, and heavily doubting all her plans and ideas. Now that we have the finished show, we can see that this is indeed leading somewhere, and that in the end he's going to listen to her and trust that she'll do what she thinks is best. However, I will say that in the lead up and when I was watching as it released, it was getting very old very quickly. The plan is that Eleven wants to use the timing of the lightning, which occurs every 7 seconds like clockwork, to mask the sound of her landing on the metal roof of the facility after she jumps the fence. Hopper thinks that this is too dangerous, and it seems likely he's going to try to Rambo his way inside until they get the radio contact from Dustin's team. This tells them that they're in the Upside Down too, and they need help to get their car free from the wall. However, when they tell him where the wall is, it becomes clear that this thing wraps all around the Upside Down version of Hawkins, as they're on the other side of town to the wall that Hopper and Eleven found and fought the soldiers at. I gotta say that now all is said and done, this is actually a really well implemented mystery. I seriously at this point had no idea there was just nothingness outside the wall, and I followed the ideas of the party blindly. I do love when a show's still able to get me with a mystery. Now knowing they're dealing with something really big and that this is massively urgent, Hopper decides it's time to let Al help him more actively, even if it is begrudgingly. Yeah, it's progress, I guess. Then it's over to Max and Holly again, where we learn what her life's been like since Vecna killed her, and Eleven was able to bring her back to life. I really liked this scene, to tell you the truth. This is a scene that very much could have fallen into the typical Stranger Things exposition trap, where a character talks at you for ages, but in the end, that's not what happens. Instead, we see a lot of what Max experiences, and it's just far more gripping as a result. She makes her way through some of the memories, and I did have one quibble here. She sees a flyer for a musical that Joyce is putting on with a cast that includes Hopper, the Wheelers, and Eddie Munson's dad. Oh, and according to the wiki, it also had Bob Newby's sister, but most crucially, it had Vecna in it too. I just don't get why you'd include this only for it to go nowhere and feel like it has no impact on the story and characters. There's not even a single conversation that this dude they knew in high school is leading an alien army to kidnap kids and is the root of pretty much all the pain these people have experienced over the course of the last couple of years. I don't know, for me it would have been better to not see this if they were never going to address it, because it's a massive, massive plot revelation. I mean, imagine if this happened to you! Yeah, they probably don't think about him all that much, but the reveal that the boy you thought was murdered in high school turned out to be a serial killer who killed his family and is now after yours using magical powers deserves a passing mention, doesn't it? I guess you could argue it happened off screen, but still, it's weird. I feel that including more of the elements of the stage show would have been far better to really help with this sort of thing. And it's not like you need to include every single scene where the various different party members sit down to explain things to the others. This would have been a good addition. Max talks about how she seemingly adventured through Vecna's memories for ages trying to find a way out, but she couldn't, only to hear Kate Bush being played. Lucas was still sending her a sign that he was there for her, and as we get into the good stuff, we cut away, because of course we do. It feels like this happens so often in the show, but hey, at least they didn't send us to another low-stakes exposition scene. Derek arrives at the base, and the soldiers are huge assholes to him. At first I thought, yeah, fair enough, this kid's approaching an obvious restricted area, but once they learn who he is, you'd think they'd say, oh shit, and treat him a bit more gently as they're there to protect him, right? Instead, this dude pushes him multiple times and is nasty all round, probably trying to get you to dislike them so that you don't really care when Vecna and the boys roll up on them and destroy them with no mercy. Derek heads inside and goes into the bathroom, where he relays where he is and is given instructions on what to do and how to behave. I have to ask though, can the military not intercept radio communication like this? It feels like you shouldn't be able to do this basic spy stuff from within a military base. It's just very odd to me. I think that sometimes you really do need to suspend your disbelief when it comes to Stranger Things, but this one is particularly egregious to me. It's kind of the same with the next scene as well, where Eleven jumps over the fence timed with the lightning to infiltrate the base. Why would there be so few goons when they know for a fact there are monsters lurking in the Upside Down? I think in the previous scene with Hopper and Al, they said there were 3 men. 3? It seems utterly ridiculous, especially once she kills that one guy and lets Hopper in, and they just stroll around the base in the open. Come on now. We briefly cut back to Derek giving a crazy speech about leading everyone to salvation, which I found extremely funny, before we head over to the Hawkins gang again where they're continuing to prep for their plan. This time by heading over to the tunnels that open up near the Squawk. Here is where we get the beginning of one of the best scenes in the episode, where Mike and Will are talking about how Will was inside the demo and watching his mum fight it off with the axe. Will felt like he was completely unable to do anything to help. However, Mike quite rightfully thinks that there's more at play, as the demo's a giant monster, and Joyce was a short person with a wood-chopping axe. These things eat bullets for breakfast and kill people with ease, but it never even attacked her, and thus Mike suggests that Will is like a sorcerer with innate powers who can challenge Vecna in the hive mind, that he was keeping it back himself. It's just a really cute little scene where Mike's building up his friend, but it's also tinged with this sad element where it's clear to Robin that Will has feelings for Mike. You see him do what she told him she did with Vicky to test the waters, but Mike simply reacts in the way a friend would, and when he leaves, Will looks so downtrodden and sad. Man, this whole scene was just really compelling to me. A quiet little scene, but it's one of the most important, coupled with his upcoming chat with Robin that in turn will let him master his powers and face Vecna in key moments. Then it's back to the Upside Down, this time for the car crew. Dustin starts to figure things out and interrupts a budding argument between Jonathan, Nancy and Steve to reveal his information about the wall and where he thinks it starts. There's a lot of sniping back and forth in this scene that gets really tedious, and Steve honestly comes across as such an asshole and a downer. He wants to go out and find Holly, and yet he's trying to shoot down Dustin's plan right from the get-go, even though it's the only one they have. Also, my god, once you finish the series, you can really see how many sit-down crowd-around style exposition scenes they have. At a certain point, it feels like they tell you so much of what's going on instead of showing you, and it does get a bit old. They decide to go to Hawkins' lab, which Dustin's figured out is the epicenter of the Upside Down and the wall, and here we cut back to Max's storyline again inside the lab and finally get to see what happened. Once again, I love how this sequence is framed. We keep cutting back between the typical Stranger Things exposition, but now we're also seeing it play out in Max's memory, which is a far more engaging way to go about it. She makes her way through the memories until she comes to the hellscape, and thus the gateway back to her mind and out of Henry's. Unluckily for her though, instead of sprinting towards it, she sort of dawdles and the tape runs out and the gate closes and Henry appears. She manages to outrun him, and I do wonder how. I mean, dude, this is your mind. We see later on that he can teleport through memories and can also use his vine arms, but he just power walks after her here, not really doing any of it. I think if they showed her dodging attacks and him sprinting after her, it would have felt way more intense. That being said, his axe murderer acting is so good here, and when he arrives at the cave and he has this terrified yet furious look, it is so intriguing. This was such a great mystery to set up, and it actually had me thinking and theorizing for ages afterwards. I really enjoyed how it was resolved in the end, although at the same time, I wish we could have gotten more of his backstory in that way. Instead, so much was kept in that play, which is exceedingly lame. But yes, I think he probably gives the season's best performance and crafts such a complex and terrifying villain all throughout the season. Back in the present, Max tells Holly that they're almost out of time, and she thinks they'll be able to escape, but then in the meantime, Holly needs to go back and pretend like nothing's wrong, that Henry can't suspect a thing. My god, this is such a powerful little scene, especially when Holly gets that look in her eye and asks what she has to do, like she's going into battle. Making Holly a more prominent member of the cast for the final season just feels like such a home run. This storyline probably has some of the most powerful scenes, and she's such a good actress too. It kind of restores those early season vibes where it's a bunch of brave little kids facing down the supernatural. So here we go from banger scene to banger scene, as in the tunnels, Robin pulls Will aside and gives him the rundown on what her experience was like with Tammy Thompson, and how she had her heart broken when she realized Tammy wasn't going to return her feelings. How she began to spiral, and that in the end, she had to realize that it was never about Tammy, it was about herself. She wanted external validation to try to justify the fact that she's gay to herself, when instead, she just had to be able to accept who she is, and by doing so, she became Rockin' Robin. By doing this, she hints to Will that he's in the same scenario she was in, where he wants Mike to love him so he can fill the hole where self-love should be. This in turn sets him on the path to what he does at the end of the episode, powering up into the hive mind and saving the day as the Sorcerer. This is such a powerful little scene, and I have to say that once again, we see how those strange pairings and team-ups can lead to some of the show's best storylines and best moments. It makes you realize they should have done more of this sort of stuff across the years to give everybody this chance to shine. It was such a sweet little sequence and serves as such a great contrast to how dark and violent things become by the end of the episode. I also love the dick jokes that they ended on here. It was so unexpected and yet also just helped to make the characters feel a bit more real, you know? Speaking of which, this is where things start to get more action-packed. The dude Alan Hop captured finally makes it to the base to alert the guards, and I do have to wonder, soldier. Why didn't they kill this guy? I feel that they were clearly not going to go back to help him, so if he never broke free, he would have died of dehydration or something anyway. Plus, they have not been hesitating to kill anybody this season. Quite literally across the whole group, they are far more comfortable with extreme violence and death. Hell, Al snapped some dude's neck just before, so why not this guy too? Inside the base, they sneak up behind some lab tech to try to get into restricted areas, but he doesn't have clearance, and he doesn't know who does, so he gets knocked out. Ouch. They start to break down the door and then the power goes out and the kryptonite gets used on Al. Once again, I did like this because it shows these guys aren't pure idiots and they do have plans in place should Al attack them or if Carly managed to escape or anything like that. However, I do feel that for a huge amount of the story, Al is getting sidelined and I get why they do it. 11 is absurdly strong and thus it gives more stakes if she's down and out and Hopper has to face them all alone. It's just that it happens quite a lot, you know, and this isn't even the last time. It happens once more in the finale and so she feels like a bystander across much of the story. This is wild to me because she really does feel like a main character in so many ways and was the trump card for so long before this. However, that being said, it does work and this whole sequence is just absurdly good. But still, from here, I think I'll just finish up the Upside Down storyline and that way we can focus entirely on the best sequence of the season and honestly, one of the best of the show's run, the Sorcerer versus the Demogorgon squad. Kay and the boys burst into the base and even then, there are so few of them here. I know they're fortifying the area where the kids are, but I find it so odd they have so few goons in the demon world, you know? I guess Hopper would have no chance otherwise, right? Kay steps into, I guess, her office, and this is where she finds 11 hiding, who in turn reveals to her the game's up and that her men are going to die. This is when Hopper springs his trap. He'd stuffed the lab tech into a wardrobe, and this attracted the attention of all three soldiers, who ended up spraying bullets inside and not checking behind them in case there was anybody coming up on them. Feels a bit of an oversight. This leaves them open to being spanked by Hopper, who kills two outright and then engages in a very Hollywood-style fistfight with a huge amount of punches to the head, people shrugging off a ton of physical abuse, going through furniture and glass, and then acid to the face. Ouch! That being said, whilst it is a bit plot armory, this fight is truly epic and exciting, and so it didn't really bother me that much. I was just shocked that there were only 4 soldiers in the entire base, you know, and if there are more, why aren't they coming to help when they hear the shots? Hopper then gets caught by the tentacle thing, which allows Kay to come in and monologue to him when the sensible thing to do to this man who has Rambo'd his way through multiple men is to shoot him in the head right now. In hindsight though, this whole scene, this is the peak of her character. She asks him to tell her what he knows that she doesn't. This, coupled with Vecna straight up attacking the military, made me think that in Volume 2, or at least the finale, the military would actually get involved in trying to kill Vecna, with the goal of killing him, and then eventually betraying and kidnapping Al, but nope. They're kept completely separate from that storyline, which I think honestly was a bit of a shame, as Kay in particular has so much potential that they never really use. She then very quickly gets knocked out, and that's all she wrote. I really don't get why they didn't kill her here. It's not like she's just gonna stop hunting them after all, and Hopper is clearly willing to do what it takes to save Al. It's just a bit confusing. Then we actually came to something that completely got me on the first watch. I remember thinking that Vecna was stuck inside this place, but his powers were so strong, he could still pull the strings, and that Hopper would accidentally let him out, leading to the massacre. So Hopper has this emotional goodbye to Al, but of course, I figured at the time he wasn't dying, as they've already done that sort of storyline before. So when he comes back and we get the reveal of Carly, I was honestly in shock. I'd kind of forgotten about her character by this point in my initial binge, and thus it took me by surprise. I loved the twist, and coupled with my hype about the action sequences, which I really enjoyed, this episode finished off very strong. I also like that after this is when you get the Vecna reveal, and you stay with that storyline from there onwards, because that is such an epic moment, and it didn't deserve any cuts. This takes us to the other storyline, The Great Escape. Mike and Lucas manage to tunnel their way into the bathroom, but of course they're a bit reckless about it, and end up damaging the plumbing, which comes back to bite them in the ass. As they're preparing the escape hole, Derek is leading a meditation session, which is probably one of my favourite comedy moments so far. This kid is so good, and the perfect addition to the season. He's funny, and when he becomes delightful Derek, he's really sweet, and on top of that, they don't overexpose his character. Every so often, his little walkie-talkie buzzes, letting him know to send one of the kids down into the tunnels. They manage to get 3 kids down there before things inevitably start to go wrong with the water pipe about to burst. I have to say that I really like that the plan does go to shit, because it should go to shit. They're busting into a military base using truly absurd tactics with minimal planning and so many variables to account for. It would have been completely insane if they pulled it off, and so I'm pretty glad it only sort of works. I also love that it intercuts with the battle at the secret base, as you have this fun juxtaposition of the insanity of Will and Mike trying to hold the pipes together, whilst Robin leads a group through the tunnels to be put in the back of the truck like some horrible child trafficking syndicate. Eventually they are spotted, because of course they would be, and so Lucas takes 2 more kids whilst Derek, Mike and Will hold the door shut against the soldier. I have to say Derek is very strong. He was holding the soldier back alone at one point. Of course they, along with Joyce and 2 other kids, are caught, whilst Murray loads the 3 with Robin into the truck and Lucas drags his 2 along in the tunnels. Mike's group gets dragged out before Sullivan, and then the battle begins. This whole sequence where the Demogorgons attack everybody all at once to try to get the kids is pure pure adrenaline. It's so exciting and brutal and insane. I'm a bit curious as to if the Demogorgons are supposed to be immortal or something, because they get shot a shit ton, but that's okay because it's such a great sequence that you don't really care that much. I just love that feeling of terror as the heroes are running through the carnage and the soldiers are getting picked off left and right, whilst at the same time, the demos are hunting the truck and the kids in the tunnels. I also really love that they didn't hold back on the violence here. The kills were very brutal, and I think they needed to be brutal. This is maybe the peak of the season in terms of fear factor, and it had to be. You want the heroes to get slapped down and lose badly here in order to build up how dangerous Vecna is for Volume 2. So yes, we have 3 peak action/horror sequences intercut with one another, and what I really enjoyed is that the military actually starts to win. Yeah, they lose their guys, but Flamethrower Dude comes in clutch and paralyzes all of them at once, which means that Vecna has to come in, looking way scarier than before, and wrecks them in moments. He gets his demos back up, he snatches the kids, whilst also for some reason leaving all the protagonists alive. Yes, he orders the demos to kill them right after, but he legitimately has Will right there, and he doesn't snap his neck. Oh well, you kind of need this sort of plot armor for the story to work, don't you? Too bad for the only nice soldier though, who dies a brutal death with tendrils through the back of his head and out the face. Ouch. Oh, and Joyce legitimately runs at him and he just throws her, even though he's been killing people with ease up to this point. In these moments, the plot armor does get more obvious, so I think avoiding them would be better. You don't need to have him talk to Will. He can come in, kill the soldiers, walk back out, and the demos grab the kids before they come back to kill everyone else. I think that way it just flows a bit better is all. Regardless though, none of this really matters as we follow this with perhaps the greatest scene of all time in the context of the show, where Will is able to accept himself, and by doing so, he proves he's not weak. He proves that Vecna's wrong about him, and he taps into the hive mind. He kills the Demogorgons with ease and saves his friends. This scene is so magical and emotional and epic. It is everything you want it to be, and it leaves you with this sense of hope, even after they've lost, instead of it just being pure bleak. Plus, all those flashback scenes with young Will and Mike were so cute, and then there's Roman's monologue. This was peak. This was a peak moment for the show. Then there's that zoom-in shot on the bloody nose. Oh, yes! Just yes! This episode is a banger. It was even more so to me before I finished the show, and so now looking back, I am being a bit more critical, but it's still probably the best episode of the season, and it really did give Volume 2 such a strong starting point when they came back from the break. However, we'll talk about that next time, and so for now, I'll just say that these have all been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Hate it? What about looking back after you finished the show in general? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.